Hey folks, welcome back. Thanks again for joining us. We have an interesting one for you today. If you're looking for aircraft, this is not the presentation for you. I think there's a grand total of two, one helicopter and one airplane. Maybe two airplanes, I can't recall. Anyway, the point is this is primarily about demolitions and fires. So check it out. Let us know what you think in the comments. And as I always say, please share it with other people you think might enjoy it or might have some insight. Thanks, and talk to you on the other side. So this is a whirlwind over a fire zone, causing a fire tornado, and this is something that seems to go right through it or in front of it without being affected. And I understand that some people will say, well, it's not affected because it's, closer to the camera than the flames or whatever. And maybe that's the case. But either way, this whole environment is whipping, and whatever that thing is not. We're going to revisit this concept a couple times in this presentation about these fires and that environment and whether things are in front of the camera or not. But either way, I mean, this is, fascinating. And also, it looks very, very similar to the other things we capture. So maybe that's a coincidence. Who knows? Okay, so like I said, we're going to come back to some more fire scenarios. But for now, we're going to transition to a demolition. Check this out. I totally understand that some people are going to just say, well, that's just something, right in front of the camera. But like I've shown in prior presentations, when things are right in front of the camera, they tend to be gigantic. And, this does not appear that way. So like I said in the intro, there are not a lot of aircraft in this presentation. This one is here because of this, tandem scenario, which you don't often see, and it's very interesting. I don't profess to be a bug expert. I'm not big on the insect world. I don't know a lot about it, but from my own personal experience, I tend not to see things working in couples like this. Now, these two presentations were put back to back for obvious reasons. There's another one where there's, seems to be like two, and it's very odd. And the other thing, too, is this thing is like a rotating drone with plumes coming off of it. So, which is cool, but it's easy to get distracted, you know. I mean, it's neat looking, but what these two things are shooting by it at that speed, I have no idea. And again, I'm not an insect expert, but I don't see any wings. I don't see anything here to justify or explain the manner of propulsion or stabilization. And just generally speaking, when I see insects and interact with them in my life, they tend to be singular, not dual. Well, unless they're mating, I have seen that. But even in that scenario, they're not synchronized the way these things are. Anyway, enough of that. Here's another demolition. And this is interesting because for some reason the camera catches this sort of echo where it's not two, but at times it looks like it. Kind of cool. It's funny too because even though we've already looked at one fire scenario, this was the capture that actually caused me to start thinking about fire because of this plume. Yeah. And so this is a logical transition point for me to go into this next capture, which, you know, this one is tough to explain. This is another whirlwind, too. It's tougher to see because the column isn't quite as obvious, but it's larger. And this thing is just moving around, seemingly unaffected by, the wind. So what this is, I have no idea, but it is clearly in the midst of a firestorm, and it's almost like it's just observing or monitoring. It's strange. And I think you can see, you know, the turning of the flames. I mean, it is definitely a fire tornado on a large scale, and this thing seems to just be largely unaffected by that. So the fact that it's in this environment makes it easy to focus on that, and but we should also point out that it looks like nothing prosaic, right? It's changing shape. It's not moving like anything prosaic. It's not a drone. It's not a bird. It's something else. And like I mentioned with the first capture that we started off with, I'm sure some people will say that's just some whatever, some artifact close to the camera. And maybe that is the case. But, you know, for my perspective, just looking at it, my eyes tell me that whatever that is, it's in that environment, in the mix, and being unaffected by that environment for whatever reason. All right, we're going to jump out of that frying pan back to a demolition. Check this out. So that's actually two right there. That's not one being an echo of its, future self or whatever. One comes out like of the middle of this structure, and then another comes from above it. These things are tough to explain, but what I can say is that it's so consistent. I mean, this look, this everything about this is just repetitive. All right, so this is our own capture, and I know it's not in keeping with the theme, but I'm just including it because this was like one of 15 or 16 that we got like this week. It's just nonstop, whatever it is. Focus on the bottom right here. This is not in a lot of frames, and um, it's also not aerodynamic in the way it's moving. So it's not aerodynamic, but it's definitely moving fast. But speaking of aerodynamics, look at this. You would think this thing's either going from right to left or left to right. That would be my guess because it looks like some sort of kind of wing structure. It's I know it's unclear, but that would be my guess. But watch this. This makes no sense to me. Zero. And the other weird part, and you'll see it in a minute, is this was actually very close to me, and I had no clue that it was there until I watched this video. And then also this thing gets in the mix somehow. And it just, the whole thing is strange and it was way too close to me. I mean, like that tree there is on my property and just, you'll see. I mean, look, this frame, but particularly the next one, this thing was in between me and my tree. Look at that. And I don't know how fast that thing is going, but if it hit me in the head, it would have been a problem. I'll tell you that. And then this thing comes like raining down from above like a crazy spider monkey. And in real time, this is what it looks like. You can't really see any of it. I mean, yeah, you see like specks of things, but that's only because you know what to look for. I mean, in real time, we're not seeing any of this. This is like going on in front of our faces without us knowing. So we're going to end this portion of the presentation with these three frames and look at them individually. And like I've said before with these things, if you know what these are, please chime in the comments and provide some taxonomy and an explanation, because we see them quite often and still have no idea what they are. All right, so there's four things of note with what we just watched. The first is look to the left of the buildings right at the shadow line, and you see this dark thing. It seems to come down and go into the buildings. And then if you look up at the top of the building, you see something perched up there, seemingly, and then a second later, it's gone right there. And then next thing you know, something's taking off like a rocket off the top of the building. And then lastly, back toward the left, you see something that looks sort of like a bird going up to the top left there. And we'll look at that more closely because it is not a bird. So now we're going to go over each of those four instances here. And this is the first one. I mean, I said it goes into the building. I don't know. It seems like it. And then this thing just disappears. And then a second or two later, like I said, like a rocket just shoots off the roof. And then there's this thing. Yeah, so here it is again. I don't know what the deal is with this, why it's not fluid right through the screen. It's like it's here and then it's there. It's hopping, which we've seen before. And then this thing, if it's a bird up there, then usually they move with wings, meaning like even if you see a pigeon hop off a curb, when they do it, their wings come out. So the fact that this just kind of dips down is a strange one to me. And like I mentioned with that first, instance, this thing is hopping through. It's not there's nothing fluid about that. And I should probably also say at the distance this camera is, it's not an insect. It's way too big to be an insect. Yet there's also no wings. So I mean, how is it even moving? And speaking of wings and propulsion, like I said, from a distance that looks kind of like a bird, right? But then when you actually look at it, look at these frames. None of these look like a bird. And I mean, to me at least, maybe it does to you, like that looks like a chess piece. It does not look like a bird to me. I mean, if somebody showed me this picture as a still image and said, hey, look at this bird, I would say, okay, it's blurry, but I guess it's a bird if it's going from, left to right, maybe. But then you look at this and you're like, well, wait a minute, what? Where are the wings and why is it going southeast to northwest? I mean, what was happening? It's like someone threw a rock. Okay, so we've reached our winding down point. This is what we started with. And when I showed you this initially, I pointed out that some may say, it's not affected by the whirlwind because it's not close to it, it's closer to the camera. And I said, then, yeah, maybe. I don't think so, but that's possible, and I can understand the perspective. Then I shared this one with you, and I made the same point. And some might say, well, it's not getting sucked up in the whirlwind because it's nowhere near it. And again, I conceded. It's not what it looks like to me, but I can understand that perspective. But this final one, we have something that's going from left to right through the smoke, without question. And it is also a whirlwind and not getting affected by that environment. I admit it's difficult to see, particularly on the left side going to the right, but then I pause it here, you see it pop out, and then I pause it again on the further right, and you see it pop out again. It's going in and out of the smoke, and that is a whirlwind that becomes a waterspout once it moves over the Colorado River. Here it is in real speed. Again, I understand it's hard to see, particularly on the left side, and it's fast, and but that doesn't mean anything. I mean, sharks are hard to see in the water too. Doesn't mean they're not there. So, from my perspective, having watched these captures with the fire, and seeing something like this where something is clearly moving through a whirlwind and being unaffected by the environment, it tells me that there's something amiss here. There's something not normal about it. Because if it were a bird, it probably wouldn't even be near it. And if it was an insect, it would just get swept up and turn into a little cyclone. But whatever these things are, and we looked at 3 separate instances of something either remaining stagnant like this one or passing through like the first one or the third one. Either way, it's 3 separate instances where there's something aerially anomalous going on because it's unaffected by an otherwise powerful whirlwind. All right, well, there you go. This was a different one. I feel like I say that a lot, but you know, and it's interesting too because even though living in Southern California, our life has a lot to do with fires, and living in the foothills in a fire zone, you would think maybe I'd watched more footage of fires, but the reality is it didn't really occur to me until recently, and I spent the last week checking out some footage, and it's really, really fascinating. So hope you enjoyed this one, and like I always say, please feel free to comment, let us know what you think, and share it with other people you think might enjoy it, and we will see you on the next one. Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.